Hello, and welcome to the channel Love of the Truth, where we strive to find the truth and cling to the truth, since the value of truth is almost impossible to appreciate. The difference between truth and everything else is a stark contrast. Specifically, we're trying to look at truths as expressed and explained in the scriptures. Those things that are real and are a part of God's creation. Specifically, we're going to look at some of God's promises. And there is a core, continuous theme in the scriptures of the promises that God has made to those that are righteous, that they will inherit the earth. And in examining the scriptures, we find that that is a key component of the good news, the gospel message that Jesus taught, that was presented in the Old Testament, that the apostles taught, that sadly most religions don't teach. The concept that this planet will be perfected, will be returned and restored to the conditions in the Garden of Eden, and that the righteous will live on that planet, on this planet, with our God and with his Son and all of the nicest people that have ever lived since creation. The fact that there are different gospel messages is undeniable. Looking at the world religions, the different concepts expressed within those claiming Christianity, there's just a tremendous disparity between the gospels that are being taught. And the scriptures are very explicit in warnings about the fact that there will be and that there are and have been competitive gospels. Paul phrased it in Galatians 1 verses 6 through 9. I am amazed that you are so quickly deserting him who called you by the grace of Christ. And the context would reveal that that is God, that is the Creator that has called the righteous by the grace of Christ for a different gospel, which is really not another, only there are some who are disturbing you and want to distort the gospel of Christ, or the gospel that Jesus taught. But even if we, any of the apostles, or an angel from heaven should preach to you a gospel contrary to what we have preached to you, he is to be accursed. And Paul goes on to emphasize this by repetition. As we have said before, so I say again now, if any man is preaching to you a gospel contrary to what you received, he is to be accursed. So in looking at the gospel message that Jesus taught, we see a number of scriptures stating that Jesus taught the gospel of the kingdom. And within one of the most famous sermons that Jesus preached, in Matthew 5:5, it states, "Blessed are the gentle, for they shall inherit the earth." Paul writes later in Romans 4, verses 13 through 14, "For the promise to Abraham or to his descendants that he would be heir of the world was not through the law, but through the righteousness of faith. And in Genesis 13, verses 14 and 15, we see the specific promise made to Abraham about inheriting the world. And Jehovah said unto Abram, after that Lot was separated from him, lift up now thine eyes, and look from the place where thou art, northward and southward and eastward and westward. For all the land which thou seest, to thee will I give it, and to thy seed forever. Now, that specific promise of inheriting that land, and by implication, as we'll see in other references, the earth, the entire earth, will be the inheritance of those judged righteous. But that specific promise was made to Abraham that the land on which he was standing, the land he could see, north, south, east, and west, was going to be given to him. We read in Hebrews 11 that he did not receive that in mortal life, that he was looking forward to a fulfillment of that promise after resurrection. Let's look at Hebrews 11, verses 8 through 10, and then verse 13. By faith Abraham, when he was called, obeyed to go out unto a place which he was to receive for an inheritance. And he went out, not knowing whither he went. By faith he became a sojourner in the land of promise, as in a land not his own, dwelling in tents with Isaac and Jacob, the heirs with him of the same promise. For he looked for the city which hath foundations, whose builder and maker is God. And in verse 13, these all died in faith, not having received the promises, but having seen them and greeted them from afar, and having confessed that they were strangers and pilgrims on the earth. So the promise was given, but wasn't received. God told Abraham what he had planned, but Abraham did not receive that land, not so much as to set his foot on, Stephen says in Acts 7 in his sermon. So what is this city, and what does that have to do with the inheritance of the earth? And who gets to inherit the earth? Well, we don't have time to look at all of the scriptures that discuss this, and there are many. It's puzzling how that gospel message is so prevalent in scripture and yet isn't part of, isn't integral to most of the gospels you hear being preached, which is puzzling and sad. But the text I would like to end with, which summarizes a lot of these issues and a lot of this information, is in Revelation 21. We read from 1 through 8. Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and there was no longer any sea. And this is immediately following the lake of fire that burns up the wicked, and that Peter describes as melting the very elements of the earth. I saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God. So at this point, God is in heaven, and the holy city leaves his presence and comes to the earth. prepared as a bride beautifully dressed for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, "Now the dwelling of God is with men, and he will live with them. They will be his people, and God himself will be with them and be their God." So the promise is that God will come to the renewed earth and live with the righteous. He will wipe every tear from their eyes. There will be no more death, or mourning, or crying, or pain, for the old order of things has passed away. He who is seated on the throne, and throughout the book of Revelation, that is Jehovah himself. That is not Jesus. Jesus is the Lamb who stands before the throne. Jehovah himself is the one who sits on the throne. He says, "I am making everything new." God is renewing or refreshing, as Peter said in Acts 3. The earth and heaven and everything, the order of things, are all going to be renewed, made fresh. Then he said, "Write this down, for these words are trustworthy and true." And he said to me, "It is done. I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. To him who is thirsty, I will give to drink without cost from the spring of the water of life. He who overcomes will inherit all this, all the earth, the holy city, the new order of things. All of that will be inherited by those who overcome this life." And just recently, in one of the previous videos, we talked about what overcoming means, and that is part of the test that is this life, to overcome those challenges. "But the cowardly and the unbelieving, the vile, the murderers, the sexually immoral, those who practice magic arts, the idolaters, and all liars, their place will be in the fiery lake of burning sulfur. This is the second death." And as I mentioned, we don't have time to look at all of the scriptures that discuss these things, but this text is a wonderful summary that God will send a magnificent city from heaven to the earth. And then God himself will dwell in that city with the immortal righteous forever. Those that overcome will inherit this. That is the gospel message. As always, please put comments in regarding topics you'd like to have discussed, or any kind of comment that you would like to make. Thank you again for your time.